Hurling on Off the Ball.
With Board Gosh Energy. Hurling. It's anyone's game.
All right, there's been a lot of debate on the state of hurling in recent weeks. Donald Cusack saying the game needs ring fencing, proper financing and proper marketing. It needs protecting and preserving. To get a sense of what's going on the ground across the country, I'm joined by Martin Fogarty, the former National Hurling Development Manager, a role he held from 2016 to 2021. And it's a role that has actually been vacant ever since his departure. Martin, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Nathan. How are you keeping?
Very well. I guess the problem with a topic this big is where do you start? And I'd imagine when you started out in that role as National Hurling Development Manager back in 2016, you were probably having similar thoughts. Where do you start with this? What were your priorities when you went into the role all the way back then?
Well, when I went into it first, it was a pretty clean sheet, Nathan. I had a responsibility for 32 counties, and to be honest about it, I didn't have much of a clue of the state of hurling in quite a lot of the country. But very quickly I found out. And as time went on, I concentrated on, I suppose, what I call the wilderness of hurling, which is roughly a line from Dublin to Galway north, and actually excluding Antrim and excluding Down. So, very, very quickly I realised how few hurling clubs there were in those counties. Now, I wouldn't have known it prior to that. I know there weren't many, but I had no idea that at the time there was just one adult hurling club in Fermanagh and just two in Leitrim and just three in Cavan and Longford. So, pretty early I could see that's where the biggest need was.
And Martin,
yes?
and maybe there's an hour with Paul Rouse on this at some stage on the history of hurling in Ireland. But that wilderness and that line that you just described across the country, historically, has that always been the case for hurling?
Well, sure, it has really, yeah. Some of the counties may have had a few extra clubs down through the years, but not enough to be self-sustainable. And very quickly I realised that, hurling in my own county, Kilkenny, Cork, Galway, etc., Wexford, would continue grand without any intervention. So I wasn't, there wasn't much I could do in any of those counties. The need wasn't there because hurling is flying in all those counties. Now, even next door to me in Laois and near enough to me, Offaly, and next door to me in Carlow, small counties, small numbers of clubs, but hurling flying in those counties. Now, it could be flying higher if we had more clubs, but all of those counties have plenty of hurling and they're not too far from counties with plenty of teams as well. Whereas up the country, the biggest problem, well, two big problems, the few clubs to begin with, and then the absolute isolation. So, if you have a club in Westport, to get one game at any level, you're travelling 20 miles roughly for a start. That's if the next club has a team at the same age level. And after that, you're probably travelling 50 miles or 50 kilometres, whatever. So, that's the big problem. Whereas the other counties, if you take Carlow, who are next door to me, a tiny county with a small amount of clubs, and they perform brilliantly. They have some brilliant hurling clubs. And you could say that they don't have enough clubs, but down the road, they have plenty of clubs in Kilkenny, plenty of clubs in Wexford, if they want games. So it's not a problem getting a game. Whereas up the country, to get a club is a problem, to get a game is a bigger problem.
It's interesting you mention Mayo, because I am a Mayo man, so I do have some sense of hurling in the county, and I'm from Ballyhonus, so hurling would have been very strong in Ballyhonus, and Turin is 5 miles down the road, which would be traditionally the heartbeat of hurling in Mayo. And 4 senior teams for so long in Mayo. But Mayo is such a vast county and such a rich GAA heritage on the football side of things. So if you take going to Mayo as an example and the countless GAA clubs that are doing brilliant work at underage level, that there's great participation, when you went to those clubs and you went to Mayo, were you pushing an open door with clubs to add hurling into the mix?
I personally wasn't going into clubs trying to get hurling started. We had it, and he's left since. We had a great games promotion officer, Adrian Hessian, who was the sole hurling, I suppose, full-time staff member in the county, and he was doing outstanding work. So how I got myself into work in these counties was I'd meet the like of Adrian, I'd meet the hurling man in the county, and we'd take it from there, and we'd see where could I help out. And more often than not, it was working on the existing clubs and bringing their coaches in and doing a bit of working with them, doing a bit of coach development. Sometimes that'd break into working with some of the teams, some of the squads, maybe even the county team. Now, the big challenge to grow the game was coming down to people like Adrian, and to the best of my knowledge, he has hurling resurrected in Ballyhonus in the last few years again. And so that, that's what I was trying to do. But the challenge is much greater in that, you need somebody in the county to try and open the doors in non-hurling areas to get hurling started. And where better than in the football clubs, because they have, they have the pitches, they have the facilities. But that in itself is, I suppose, what I would call the greatest challenge the GA has, is to try and open these doors and get a little bit of hurling going in existing football clubs. Now,
are they football clubs, Martin? Are they GAA clubs?
I should look at, realistically, they're football clubs. We can bandy that around all you like, but at the end of the day, they're GAA clubs, but they don't play hurling.
Because I read an interview on the GAA website that you had done, and you were given an example of a club up in Derry where there was a few lads who got a hurling going inside an existing Gaelic football club, only the club banned the hurling. And I go, like, how can that be allowed to happen in a GAA community where, all right, maybe the priority will still be the football, but if there's an engagement there amongst a group of people who want to get hurling going, that how a club can turn around and ban hurling, a GAA club? Yeah,
well, look, you can't force anybody to do anything, and
can you not?
I wouldn't try to do it either, because if even we'll say Liam Griffin put a motion to Congress this year, which was a wonderful motion, and in theory it sounded lovely that to be hurling in every club, and I would love to see that, but in reality it's not possible, because if you try and force somebody to do something that they don't want to do, you're getting nowhere. So you have to try and go the other way. And that little club up in Derry, their own club didn't want them hurling, but their neighbours down the road heard of their plight and said, "Look, lads, you're welcome to hurl down here, and there might be a mutual benefit for us. We might get a few more footballers out of your hurlers." And it was funny, because it was one of my first jobs when I went into the role, was to try and broker a bit of peace there and help to get that club established. Now, my part was very, very small, but the club got up and running. And ironically, I think my last role in my job was to go and present medals to their under-17s. They had won a little competition. And I got word from one of the mentors there a couple of weeks ago saying that they hope to be enter the Cuchulainn League, which is the adult league, the adult version of Taun. They hope to enter it next week or next year. So that was a story that just was brilliant. That from nothing, from maybe having 10 youngsters doing maybe 10 sessions one summer, and their own club not really wanting them to progress to hurling, they have progressed it down the road. But you see, it's very important that we don't set football up against hurling or hurling against football.
I was thinking that, that there's a political side to your role. It's no point going back to Dunloe, going in saying, hurling-ish, Gaelic Michael, it's Cliffs of Moher, it's the Giants Causeway, it's a greater thing than Gaelic football. There's a part, I'm sure, of a lot of football people where resources are finite. There's only a certain amount of money to go around. So what is the incentive for those football clubs, as you describe them, to actually embrace hurling and promote hurling and try and grow that part?
Yeah, well, you see, I can understand it 100% if you reverse the role. And, I'm down in Kilkenny, and we're a hurling county. And I personally, I don't want football to take over in Kilkenny from hurling. I'd be straight about it, and I can understand it totally. But what I'm, I suppose, trying to preach is that it doesn't have to take over. We can, and I use the word tolerate, but I don't mean that word. but we can facilitate it. And like in Kilkenny, we play a little bit of football, and it's purely social. It's purely enjoyable for most clubs. If they get close to a semi-final or a final, maybe they get a little bit more serious about it, and it doesn't impact whatsoever on hurling. Now, I'm 100% aware that it's much easier get a little team going in football than it is to get a team going in hurling. But at the same time, it's not that difficult. So, if we look at Kilkenny, we've got 44 clubs, and in excess of 30 clubs will line out an adult football team, and in excess of 30 will line out at every grade of football. So in reality, we have 3 grades of football at every level. Now the standard is whatever it is, and that doesn't matter, but there's a little competition there every year, call it a league's championship, and players can play and there's no interference. Now, it's extra easy for us down here because if, for example, I'm over the under-15 hurling team, that's automatically the under-15 football team. So the football team is within my own parish. Whereas if you go up to Mayo, or you go up to Sligo, or you go up to Leitrim, the hurling team is consistent of players from maybe 4 or 5 separate football clubs. And that's unbelievably difficult because if you're trying to arrange a match and somebody arranges a football game or a football training session in one of those 5 feeder clubs, well, then you just don't have a team. So, and what I will be looking for is that we go out there and we go into the counties and yes, we give an incentive to the football clubs, and the incentive could be football equipment. I wouldn't care what it is. And we try and encourage them to get a small bit of hurling going in such a way that, players in that club, players in that county that would like to play a little bit of hurling at a very low level, at a very social level, can do so. Now, you have a few examples where, if you take Schlockneil and Derry, they have gone to the very top in both courts. Now, I'm not looking for anything like that. They're a puck of a ball or a kick of a ball away from being All-Ireland champions in football and hurling. But, I'm not looking for that or anything close to it. I'm just looking for maybe 12 hurling clubs in every county, that have maybe 12 teams at every grade, and they can have an A and a B competition where you won't get hammered, and you get a little league stroke championship that's going to consist of maybe 6 or 8 or 10 games across the year. And I'd be happy if that could happen, if that makes any sense to you.
Well, exactly, because there's going back to your point on the football clubs in Kilkenny, there is always a danger when we're assessing where a sport is at looking at the top tier and the top level. And I sit in Croke Park last summer and watch Limerick and Kilkenny in an All-Ireland final. I think this sport is as good as it has ever been, but as you go down through the layers, there's issues, and we would look at Kilkenny in football and say, well, they're not competing in the All-Ireland series, so there's no football in Kilkenny, whereas actually, as you pointed out, there is, and they're doing their own thing, and the players are going out and enjoying it, and maybe they're not having their day in the sun at inter-county level. So actually, that little bit of growth in each county over time will all lead to something bigger. When you look back in your 5 years, were you able to achieve that in many of the places that you went?
It was unbelievable. Now, I wouldn't put it down to me. I put it down to the games promotion officer, the hurling coach, as we call them, in each county, and the tremendous work that they're actually doing. And if I were to look at, in particular, there's 13 counties, and roughly speaking, at the time I did a little survey, you had 13 counties that had 9 or less than 9 adult hurling clubs. Now that went at the time right down to 1 in Fermanagh. It went to 2 in Leitrim. It went to, we'll say, normally 3 in Cavan and 3 in Longford. And, that was a very serious situation. But if I took, for example, Fermanagh, at that time, there were what I would call 7 underage units in Fermanagh as well. Underage, which meant that the hurling was flying up there. And the big challenge was to get, that 7 clubs up to adulthood. Even half of them. Like if you could get Fermanagh from 1 up to 5 adult hurling clubs, look at the difference it could make. If you could get Leitrim from 2 to 4, and then 4 to 8, then you're starting to sing a bit. And you see, everything will improve. The county teams will improve. The whole hurling situation across that area will improve. And, even again, harping back to Kilkenny at the inter-county football level, they have a team. There are 30 or 40 players that are interested. They're not, by a long shot, the best footballers in the county, but that doesn't really matter. And they play a little inter-county tournament there every year, and that's grand. But at club level and at primary schools level, there's plenty being done. And it's not about, it's not about who can win. It's not about the standard. Because, there's only one team going to win the Sam Maguire every year. There's only one going to win Liam McCarthy. But everybody, can aspire to that. But everybody really, the real win is every club, every county enjoying the sport and being able to play the sport at a reasonable level. So I have seen right across that area a growth in underage units. But we really, really need to work 100 times harder to make sure that those units can come through to adult level. For example, with the guys on the ground, with the coaches in the various counties that could tell me very quickly where the problem was. The problem was each individual county didn't have enough clubs at any level to run a meaningful competition themselves. So together, we worked on what we call the Tánaóg leagues. And we started it at under 13, and we grew it to under 15, and then we grew it to 17 and adult. Last year was the inaugural Cuchulainn Adult League, and we had, to the best of my knowledge, 63 teams in it. Now, that was phenomenal. That meant we could have the 3 grades, and then being adults, they could drive. So, distance was huge, but they were able to drive. Whereas with the underage, we tried to put a limit of an hour's travel for a game.
Right.
Now, oftentimes, 2 teams competing, they were 2 hours apart. Now, unfortunately, they still might have to travel an hour, but we couldn't grade them. If you have only 6 or 8 teams within a radius of an hour's drive, what choice have you other than to lump them all in together?
Yeah.
We tried a few little interventions that if your team was stronger than mine, obviously, you could swap a few of your strong lads onto my team, that kind of stuff. And that has worked pretty well, that at least the games would take place and at least we wouldn't have too many hammerings. But, going forward, if we had more clubs, like if we were in an area, we'll say, where we have 10 teams. Now, if we could get 20 teams there, well, then you're singing, because you'll have A and you'll have B. And that in itself will make a huge difference, because if a team is winning by too much or losing by too much, well, let's be honest about it, there's not much fun in it, is there?
Well, and all of that then again leads on to greater strength in depth as you go through at club level. So, going back to that example in the west of Ireland at the moment, the Mayo champions will play in the intermediate championship and go up against the Galway side there. But, 10, 20 years, maybe there's an opportunity to go back and play the Galway senior champions and be competitive. And there's a perfect flow to all that if you get them playing at a young age. I'm just wondering on the difficulties of that take this in the manner it's intended. That is there a fear of hurling amongst parents and coaches that if you're going up to help your kids at a soccer club or with Gaelic football, it's they're quite straightforward sports, the basics around them, that if you haven't grown up in hurling, it's a very difficult thing to go out onto a pitch with 6-year-olds, as we were joking in here last week, as to which way do you hold the hurl, that there's a real investment needed in coaching to make it very simple for the vast majority of people in these counties who don't come from a hurling background to feel comfortable in the game.
Yeah, you're 100% there. And I had a little workshop that I used to do, and I call it taking the fear out of hurling, out of hurling coaching. And there are so many people, and I have met, and some were former college friends of mine that were maybe top footballers, and are afraid of their life to attempt to coach hurling. They think they couldn't do it. But that in itself is a bit of a myth, because, starting with myself, when we were all growing up, we didn't have coaches. You didn't. I, as far as I recall, the first game of hurling I would have played would be for the school team. I can't recall any coaching other than going to school every day with your hurl and playing away in the school field. And that was it. And, sometimes we overrate coaching. Once you bring youngsters to the field, and give them a hurl. And we didn't have helmets then, but now you have helmets. Give them a hurl, give them a ball, and put a little bit of enthusiasm into them, and the rest will happen. So
you spend too much time through the years with Brian Cody. That's the Cody mantra there. Sure, there was no coach and there was no tactics. You just sent the 15 lads out in the pitch and you won all the All-Irelands.
Well, look, that was a couple of steps down the ladder. That was a few rungs higher up. But if you take the best of hurlers you go back 20, 30 years ago, and coaching didn't exist. You just went to the field and played. And I'm quite sure it's the same in football. So, and I know, and I won't name them here, but I know plenty of people that never picked up a hurl in their life. And, a lot of them were teachers in schools, and they basically went out at lunchtime into the playground, and they just, I suppose, enabled a game. By enabling a game means that they divided the crew into two, and they let them play away, and the rest happened. So, once you see, this comes back to resources, that if we can get the hurling people into the counties, and we can get them around to the clubs and generate that little bit of interest and non-fear to people, and give them a little bit of encouragement. Unfortunately, with hurling, to get it started, you need some finance. First thing you need is the biggest resource is people. But if you can get 4 or 5 people in an area that are prepared to get a bit of hurling going, right? Look at realistically, the next thing they need is about €3,000 to buy 20 or 30 helmets and 20 or 30 hurls, because the youngsters won't have them. It's different with a football, 2 or 3 footballs, and down you go and away you go. But once that bit of equipment is sorted.
Is Croke Park making that investment?
Pardon?
Is Croke Park making that investment?
Look, up to now, no. But I've got whether I call them commitments or promises, I've got indications that there is a strong intention to do that.
But when you were in that role for the 5 years, did you go looking for extra financial resources to support new clubs, to provide the helmets, and it wasn't forthcoming?
Yeah, look, I did. And it wasn't totally forthcoming, but I managed to get some in roundabout ways. And listen, that's understandable as well, because you can't just, and I know years ago helmets were given out to schools, and I actually in my travels landed in a few schools, and there were packs of helmets shoved in under the stage in the PE hall, and that wasn't right either. So,
but it's very difficult then when you're going to clubs and you're going to football clubs and you're encouraging them to be more diverse and to bring hurling into the fold and to put resources towards that, if from the top down there's not an acceptance that needs to happen.
Look, there is an acceptance, but I suppose like a lot of things where finance is involved, it takes a bit of time, and it takes a few key people to say, look, this is needed, and it takes putting a budget on it. And I was pushing, not that you just throw money at places, that you put a package together. And I did a few pilot ones in schools where I went into schools and said, look, if we can get you A, B and C, will you commit to D, E and F? And that would involve teachers maybe taking on a little bit of coach education, committing to doing very, very simple, a little bit of nursery, a little bit of go games, maybe a little challenge match with a neighbouring school, that kind of stuff. So with any package, it has to be two-way. And I think without a shadow of a doubt, that will work. And if we could get that, within a budget, that so much per county, that we can say, right, we can maybe have 5 projects in each county, and we'll give them X amount of equipment, we'll give them X amount of coach education, and the return is going to be a little commitment there for 5 or 6 years to basically get a bit of hurling going. Now, it will fall by the wayside in some places, but to me, that's not a problem, because, the first box is ticked in that they will have got a chance. But the second box will be ticked in that if we can start it in 10 places, well, I'd be positively certain 5 of them will keep it going. And even last week, I got an excited call from, I call him a friend of mine now, down in Round Towers in Kildare, that again started up back around the time I was starting. And last week there, it was on the GA website, they fielded their first adult team. So, that example was phenomenal. There was another little club down in West Cork in a pure football area, Lecra Oak, they called themselves. And again, I was privileged to be down there a few years ago when they were starting. And last year, they actually purchased their own property. Now, prior to that, they were playing in, if you call it a farmer's field. I'm not exaggerating by saying you drive down about 2 miles of country road, you drive down the lane, you park the car and you walk and you go into a field. And they had 2 little mini pitches set up. You'd see one as you went in the gate, you'd see the tops of the goals of the other one because it was on the far side of the field, which was a hill. And little by little, they got a loan of the school field. They got a loan of the local football field. And last year, they purchased their own property. So, that's an unbelievable example of how the game can grow with very little support. So if we had support there, I've no doubt the game would flourish.
Was it a frustrating role or was it a fulfilling role?
It was humbling. It was humbling for a start because coming from Kilkenny, I suppose the land of milk and honey, we're absolutely spoiled over the years, spoiled in every way. And it opened my eyes even, spoiled even from a football term. And my club here a few years ago, we actually had 3 adult football teams. We had a senior, a junior, and a junior B. Now, I was privileged to be on the junior B team. But, at the time, we didn't think too much of it, and you just played away whenever the games were on. We had a lunatic from Laois looking after the football, a good friend of mine now. So I'm saying a lunatic in a kind way. But, he infected the club with an interest in a bit of football. And when I went up the country then in the hurling role, I realised how easy it was to kick football in Kilkenny. I realised how spoiled we were in hurling terms. And so I say to see the challenges that the hurling people have up the country was absolutely humbling. Was it fulfilling? It was tremendous. Because, down where I am, if you were looking after a team and you said, lads, we have a challenge match tomorrow in Dublin, which is little over an hour's drive, yet the faces would drop. Whereas up the country, an hour is nothing for these guys. You look at Easky there last year that went to the Junior All-Ireland final and I think a Cork team beat him. So that was, they were batting against the current straight away. But when I went up to Easky and heard that they had been down in Kilkenny for the last 10 years so many times playing challenge matches, it just blew me away. Schlockneil in Derry, before I knew where Schlockneil was, we're down here in my own club for a bit of coaching with myself. And I didn't even know the club existed. So, when you go around and you meet people like that, you're actually seeing the true Gaels. You're seeing the salt of the earth. You're seeing people that are so into the game of hurling and football, needless to say, that it's embarrassing. And I have often said that if I was living in some of those counties, I couldn't with hand on heart say I would have been involved in hurling. So difficult it is. I remember going up to try and help in Cavan when they couldn't field a team in the National League. And, it was funny in a way, but the county board, I think, told a few guys that were trying to get it going, if they could get 20 players to turn up to 5 training sessions, they'd put in a team. So I either offered or was cajoled into taking 1 or 2 of those training sessions. Well, to watch the lads trying to round up the 20 players, it was humbling and it was funny and it was brilliant, because we held a little meeting up there as part of a coaching session, and I think the lads thought that I was counting the players, because I know a few guys came in and signed in and went out and came back and signed in again. But they ended up with a team, and they ended up, I think, they're winning the Lowry Mar competition.
Yeah, so it all worked out in the long run.
Yeah, sure, it's brilliant. I mean, these people have such a passion for the game, it defies all logic.
What about the strongholds then? Just as we start to wrap up, obviously there's been Dunlogue really sparked a huge conversation that went off in all sorts of tangents, and are there going to be issues in Clare and Limerick when you can't see it, can't be it anymore? The games are behind a paywall, that the inspiration won't be as freely available. When you look at the hurling strongholds around the country, are they thriving, or would you have concerns long term about the way the sport is going?
Look, in the hurling strongholds, and I'm talking about strongholds. I'm including my neighbours Laois and Offaly and Carlow in those strongholds, because those teams are phenomenal, and Westmeath, just to mention a few, they're phenomenal based on the playing population that they have. They're unbelievable. The skill level is unbelievable, and unfortunately in hurling, if there's a small gap between two teams, and that could be one player, there could be a 20-point margin. Like if you look last night now at Offaly and Wexford, we'd say under 20. And if you take, for example, the Offaly team and take the chap that got player of the match there, Adam Screeney. Like if he hadn't been playing for Offaly, that game could have gone the other way, probably would have gone the other way, and could have gone the other way by 10 points. Now that's not blowing him up. But, in any particular county, I look at Westmeath, for example, and I see the small number of clubs that they have. And I can see sometimes they're pushing it up to the likes of Kilkenny. But they're working off of probably 6 senior clubs at best. I look at Antrim. And while Antrim might have 24 hurling clubs, they have 4 realistic senior clubs. Now, those 4 clubs are absolutely brilliant in that Lochiel are winning All Irelands, Dunley are going very close, Ballycastle have been in them, and Cushendall have won them or gone to them. So, those clubs are unbelievable. They're phenomenal. But for the county team to produce a team that can compete with the likes of Kilkennys and the Corks and the Tips, etc., they just don't have the numbers. Now, every so often, they might get a bunch together. And one of Offaly's biggest problems, in my opinion, is that a few times in our history, they absolutely punched above their weight. And they came up with twice they came up with a phenomenal group of players at the same time and won All Irelands. And, for that to be sustained, they'd need twice as many clubs. Do you understand what I'm coming to?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, like, the hurling at the top level is absolutely phenomenal. And, we'll say, I wouldn't doubt for a second what Don Logue is saying. I'm not knowledgeable enough in the rights of TV and all that kind of stuff. Of course, I'd like to see all the games on my own television here. Of course I would. And of course I understand people that can't log on and that kind of stuff. And, I think the National League finals, I don't think any bar the Division 1 final was on television. And I think none of the National League finals were in Croke Park. And I think all the football finals were in Croke Park and they were all on television. But that doesn't concern me in the slightest. They're all, I suppose, icing on the cake. What concerns me is the wilderness, the 13 counties, we'll say, that are struggling.
And on that
top
then,
teams, pardon?
Just on that then, on to wrap up on the wilderness, the role of National Hurling Development Manager. You spoke there about, getting access to funds. Clearly, from what you're saying, Croke Park aren't just going to throw bags of cash out and say, let hurling thrive in these counties. You need to have a well-formulated plan of how it's going to work around coach education, around equipment, all of that. And you went through that process. That role hasn't been filled since you left, which is coming up on 18 months ago?
Yeah. Well, you see, the first thing I'd say is it's not Croke Park. Like, we all give out about, well, we don't all give out about, some people give out about Croke Park, but Croke Park is only a building. And, Croke Park has a small number of people working in it, and most of them are doing some form of administration, secretarial work. I don't think the Director General even has a vote at the top committee level. So when we talk about Croke Park, we're talking about every county in the country, because the committees that make the rules, the committees that decide what happens, are made up of people from your county and my county and every other county. And that's where the problem is, that people on, let them be national or let them be provincial committees, or down the line even county committees, need to start shouting louder and saying, look, this is a problem. It's not the Director General or the President's problem or fault in the slightest. It's the people that will say are on committees that make decisions And the problem with committees is they only last maybe 3 years. And in a county setup, they might only last a year. So what's really needed are, I suppose, full-time staff, dedicated hurling staff that have nothing on their mind only hurling, and that have a bit of leadership with, I suppose, teeth, that can constantly, to quote Don Logue, keep beating the hurling drum. And that is important, because unless you have somebody beating the drum, it becomes nobody's job. It becomes nobody's responsibility. And
well, with your role vacant, it does seem as though there is nobody beating that drum.
That's the problem. Yeah, there needs to be.
And why do you believe that nobody has stepped into your role?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Why do you think that you haven't been replaced?
I suppose in my last year, COVID came in, and Croke Park was taking as many redundancies as they could to cut back, which was very understandable. And I kind of figured myself at that stage that this role I was in, which was only a 5-year role anyway, hadn't the hope of being replaced, because they were already taking redundancies. And it was never a full-time permanent role. I think it came off at the back of the Liam Sheedy report. So that was possibly the first problem. Now, the second reason, I suppose, is you just don't have enough people sitting on the various committees, provincially or nationally, that say, look, here's a problem and this needs to be solved. And it's not just one person. You probably need a body of people. Like if you take those 13 counties, we don't even have one hurling full-time staff member in each county. Like there's one man, and he's unbelievable, and he's covering Leitrim and Sligo. Now that's not humanly possible. So we need a team of hurling people that are almost self-sufficient to get into those counties with through whatever committee.
And would that suggest then, Martin, that those committees, and I don't have the makeup of all those committees, and maybe you have a better insight into where those committee members are from, and you're speaking as a Kilkenny man here, but that a lot of those committees are made up of people from the stronger hurling counties, and maybe they just don't give a damn that much about those in the wilderness?
Well, you wouldn't be wrong there. But they're from every county. Like if you take, if it's Central Council, I might have the wrong title, and as far as I know, it has a delegate from every county. So every county has delegates, but they're not all worried enough, and some of them are too busy. Like if you take, for example, a strong football county, and let there be maybe a chairperson in that county. They have so much work to do. They're tied up so much with looking after what they're doing that they don't have time to be worried about hurling. That's why you need a few people like myself, like a dog with a bone, that are totally zoned in on hurling in these places. And, I would never blame, we'll say, a county chairman in a football county for not doing something for hurling, because he or she, they probably haven't time to do it. But all I would like to see is that somebody like the dog with the bone, like myself, that's coming in to try and do something that they would facilitate you, and I suppose wouldn't put a stick in your wheel. Do you understand me?
Yeah.
And that's the big one. And you see, you can talk about coach education that for the whole night, but it's actually irrelevant. Coach education is further down the line. What's needed, first of all, are games, right? Because without the games, you can forget about coaches, you can forget about players. So the first thing needs to be in place are games. And if you have games, then you get teams. And if you have teams, you need coaches. And then you can talk about educating them. I wouldn't care if they were never educated. And that's where the Tánaóg and the Cúchulainn came into being, that will provide just a small competition. I'm talking here about 7 or 8 games across, in the whole year. So you're looking for 7 or 8 Monday nights or Wednesday nights that are not going to be cut across to play the few games. And then you have a start, and you grow it on then from there.
Martin, I suspect we could be here all night talking about this. I'd love to come back to it again over the coming months, or maybe even over the coming years, and check in and see how things are progressing. In the short term, the rumour going around is that the dream team of Fogarty and Cody are looking to get the band back together and are open to offers from any of those teams in the wilderness.
thinking of taking on a bit of football, to be honest with you. I was watching Kildare and Sligo playing under 20 the other night, and I didn't fall asleep. And the reason was I actually saw young players of 20 years of age kicking a ball over the bar from outside the D. I saw one or two lads kicking it over the bar from the 45-yard line. Something I've always preached in hurling, that striking is probably the most important skill. And through my total ignorance of football, I've said, you know, the longer you can kick a ball, the better you'll be. And I watched in the inter-county seniors where they nearly won't kick until they're in the D. But I watched the under-20s the other evening kicking from the 45. And it says if an under-20 can kick from the 45, surely a senior can kick from the 50-yard line. So thinking of dabbling the foot in football, because I think I'm regarded as old school when it comes to hurling.
Well, it's great that the football men of Sligo and Kildare are finally converting the true hurling men. Martin, brilliant to talk to you.
Take care.
Great stuff there from Martin Fogarty. Hurling, it's anyone's game. Off the Ball has teamed up with senior hurling championship sponsors Bord Gáis Energy to uncover stories highlighting the positive impact hurling has on people's lives. For full competition details, just get on to bordgaishenergy.ie/home/BGE-GAA.
Hurling on Off the Ball.
With Bord Gáis Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.